Welcome to the space between two lines. I'm Alex Saunders, and this is a space for real, honest conversations about fertility, pregnancy loss, and the journey to parenthood. Here, we hear the stories of people navigating the highs, the lows, and everything in between. A place to feel seen, understood, and less alone. Because every story matters, and so does yours. Today's guest is Jess, whose fertility journey has spanned more than 6 years, 3 rounds of IVF, multiple losses, multiple transfers, an ectopic pregnancy that resulted in the removal of her tube, and the devastating discovery of stage 4 silent endometriosis after multiple surgeries. But somewhere amongst the grief, uncertainty, and heartbreak, Jess found another layer to her healing: connection, spirituality, and becoming a psychic medium, supporting other women navigating infertility and loss. Jess is still very much on her journey, but today she shares how she's learning to find meaning, hope, and healing through it all. Welcome to the podcast, Jess. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Did you want to start by introducing yourself to our audience and just telling us what your life looks like at the moment?
Sure. Online, I go by Jessica Lucy because that's my first and middle name. But life at the moment is, well, I'm 6 years into my fertility journey at the moment, and I've just finished my 3rd round of IVF and my 6th transfer, which unfortunately failed. But my life at the moment, I suppose, is looking a lot calmer than it has in the past. Every other time I've had a loss, and I've had, I don't know, a lot of realizations and stuff that's kind of helped me navigate where I'm at right now. So I've found spirituality in the sense of, I feel like when all the normal ways of healing didn't work, such as medication, therapy, I looked into alternative ways of healing. So that looked like energy healing for me, like Reiki. And then the more I did all of that, the more it kind of uncovered kind of my own passion in that space as well. So I use a lot of that style of healing to help navigate my way through as it kind of stands now.
Yeah, amazing. And do you support other people with that kind of healing as well?
Yeah, so I learned Reiki 1, which is just learning Reiki on myself, but I eventually kind of I uncovered my own psychic abilities, one would say, became really in tune with my own intuition. And then I started just kind of really leaning into giving guidance for other women kind of navigating this stuff. And especially it kind of started with my friends, and then I would do it for people at work. And then every time I would because I use cards a lot, I would always pull a card and it literally is like exactly what they needed to hear in that moment. I was like, okay, well, something's going on here. Something feels a bit magic. So while I've kind of helped other people navigate their healing, it's helped me heal in a way, because I'm like, it just feels, yeah. And I'm in HR, so I'm very a people person anyway. I'm not like the normal HR where the fun police. I like to say I bring the fun, but I'll be doing cards for people at work, because I feel like life can be way more magical if you try and find the magic. But if you're constantly blocked off to it, you're always going to think the worst of everything in a way.
Yeah, what a beautiful way to look at things. And we might at the end just touch on how you can further support people, and we'll share your TikTok because I know you've been quite open about your journey and where you are at the moment. But obviously it's been 6 years, so you have had quite a complex journey with your fertility. So I want to take you back now 6 years, and when you initially decided the time was right for you to extend your family and you wanted to have a baby. What did life look like for you? And did you have any preconceived ideas around fertility at that point in time?
I think for me, well, so 6 years ago now, that was COVID. So we were getting married, meant to be getting married in Bali, and then obviously Corona happened. But my preconceived notion was, you buy a house, you get a dog, you get married, you have a baby. So when the marriage thing had a bit of a, whatever, but we then just decided to get married here in Perth, just down south, and it ended up being amazing because we got to bring our dog, and it was just way better than we could have imagined if it ended up being in Bali. So that was kind of the first thing that taught me, just because one thing doesn't go to plan doesn't mean it can't be beautiful, like in another way. But then I thought, okay, well, great, I'll just get pregnant straight away. That's not how it works. And then we ended up falling pregnant naturally. And I also had just started a new job. So I was fresh into this new job. It was only a few month contract. And I was like, oh shit. And I was like really anxious the entire time. And my body just knew something wasn't right. Like I did not sleep a wink, I reckon. And I Googled the whole time. I was really, really stressed. And I was kind of, I think to myself back 5 years ago, and I was like, no way ready to be a mum, even though that's what society told me I was meant to do. And I was the age my mum was when she had me. But I was like, I think back, I'm like, oh my God, she was a nervous wreck. She didn't understand how to regulate her emotions properly. So if she did have a child, she would have projected a lot of that onto her kid. Like, I just know I would have. So, yeah, I remember just being incredibly anxious. And then I remember going to a scan and she was like, oh, you're not really far enough along. We decided not to tell anyone because, again, that's what society tells you. Keep it a quiet until it's safe. And I thought then telling people might make me feel less anxious. So we ended up telling our family members on Easter. And I vividly remember a family member saying, why are you telling us so early? Like, are you not worried that something might happen? And I was like, I'm already anxious enough.
My God. Wow. That's
Yeah,
wild that
I
someone would
know.
do that.
But I was like, I'm already anxious enough. Okay. And then the week later, I think I would have been about 8 weeks. And I remember driving to the scan, and I remember saying in my head, it was like, there's not going to be a heartbeat. There's not going to be a heartbeat. And I was like, no, no, there is going to be, there is going to be. Like, I was trying to like override that, what I knew deep down. And then, yeah, I just remember walking in there and she was just like, oh, I'm really sorry. Like, I don't know if you've been through this, but you go in there, they do the scan, like, oh, can you actually just go empty your bladder and then come back? And you just kind of like, no, if they need to do the internal, then there's something's probably not right. And then, yeah, she was like, sorry, there's no heartbeat. And I just remember, because I remember my husband wasn't with me at the time. I was like, don't worry about it. It's all fine. Don't come. But I remember my mum wanted to come and she was in the waiting room. She was a bit late. So I remember I just like walked straight out and she followed me. And so that, then I just cried outside. I remember that. But that was kind of my first real loss. And it just kind of catapulted from there. Every situation after almost has just been worse than the one before. Like, I remember I had to have a D&C for that. And I remember going into hospital, and I like to say I have a really high pain threshold because I have stage 4 endometriosis, which I found out after this, and I don't feel pain, which I'm very grateful for. Mine just impacts my fertility. So it's kind of like catch 22, I guess. But I remember going in for this D&C and they give you a medication called misoprostol to help start the process. And there was a lot of women in there that were clearly there for the same thing that day, because I could hear them all start like screaming in pain, like a lot of pain. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be me next. And it just kind of like never came. But the girl who came in after me was given it and she got into pain really quickly. So they ended up taking her through into surgery before me because she was obviously in a lot of pain. They then came to me, it was close to 6 p.m. and they'd cancelled my surgery because an emergency C-section had come in, and then they didn't perform surgery after 6 p.m. And I was like, oh, okay. So then they put me in overnight, and then I had to have the misoprostol, which is what they give women who do have the medical, what is it, termination, I suppose. And as soon as my husband left me for the night, because I got put on the maternity suite in the private hospital, and so I could hear babies crying, but my pain went from 0 to 100, and I was in horrendous amount of pain. And I briefly remember a nurse coming in and saying, oh, what's your level of pain? And I was like screaming at her. I was vomiting in pain. I was like curled over on the bed and I was like, I don't know what that means. Like, what do you? And she's like, well, 10, your arm's being ripped off. I was like, 9.5. Like, I feel like my insides are being ripped out right now. And I just remember the whole night, they took forever to give me medication to kind of calm me down because I was begging for surgery at that point. And then basically the nurses had to keep coming and checking to see if I'd passed the pregnancy. And I remember saying to one of the nurses, "Oh, there's something in the bathroom." And she goes, "Oh, you can just flush it." And I was like, "That's not what the other nurses have told me." And I was just like, this is just the most fucked up situation. And I'm all by myself. And I remember one of the main doctors coming in and he's like, "Oh, we have to do a scan just to check." And then he said, "I'm pretty sure there's still something left. So you'll have to go to the early pregnancy center across the hospital." So I remember being wheeled across the hospital. Then I remember the people in there weren't really talking to me. They were just kind of treating me like, I don't know, like a lab kind of rat type thing. They're like, "Oh, she has a split uterus and there's still product left. She's still going to need surgery." So this is like midday the next day at this point. And that was like the most traumatic thing. And that really catapulted me into hell almost. And from that point, I remember I had to have surgery and all of that. But that was one of the most hardest things I've ever had to navigate as like someone who just wanted their first baby, fell pregnant, and then that's her first loss. Like it's 0 to 100. I then discovered I had endometriosis after that. They could see it all over my scan. And I had a septate uterus.
Okay, so when you went for that extra check, they found all of that then?
Well, no. I remember her saying about the split uterus. So I went to my GP after I told her what had happened. She told me to put in a complaint, which at first I was like, "Oh, who cares? Don't worry." And she goes, "Not for you, but for the next person." And that just drives something in me. I was like, okay, well, I need to help people. So I don't want anyone else to do this. I ended up putting in the complaint and they actually changed the process. They don't give women misoprostol before the surgery anymore. And I do know that because I've had multiple D&Cs there since. So I can confirm they no longer do that, well, especially for me. But I remember going to my GP and she booked me in with another scan because I wanted to hear what this split uterus was about. So they determined I had a septate uterus. So do you know what that is?
Yeah, would you mind explaining that just for anyone who doesn't know?
Yeah. So it's where like a septum is like a piece of muscle, I suppose. Cartilage is in your uterus. So it splits your uterus in half almost, depending how big it is. But it can really impact like pregnancy getting to full size or even just implantation, or it's quite common for miscarriage as well. But mine was quite large. I think it doesn't sound very big, but it was like 2 centimeters. So it split it all the way in half when, I mean, you think a uterus is like this big, but it's actually only like this big. And so, yeah, mine was basically splitting it in half. So I ended up getting surgery to have that removed. So they also saw endometriosis on that scan. I also had an MRI for the surgeon to really navigate, and I had it everywhere. It was like I was riddled with it.
Wow. So silent endometriosis then, you didn't have any other symptoms?
I would say the only symptoms I really had were like I've always had a heavy period, but I'm never like I've seen people curled over on the floor in pain. So I just never associated myself with having severe symptoms and maybe just exhaustion. But again, I think that also comes down to, I thought I was depressed. I thought I was anxious. And I say I thought is because later down the track, I got misdiagnosed with those when I actually had ADHD, not being able to regulate properly. But in terms of endometriosis pain, I just didn't have it.
So how long were you trying to conceive before you became pregnant the first time? Was it a long
I
period?
would say about 6 months.
6 months. And then what was the time frame to having that surgery after you had your pregnancy loss?
So I remember the pregnancy loss was in about April and my surgery was in September.
Okay, so a bit of a wait.
A
And
bit
I
of a
assume you
time.
were told to wait to try and conceive until you had that surgery. Is that
Yeah. They were
so?
basically don't try.
Yeah. So after the surgery, how did you process that information and what were the next steps that I guess the specialists were telling you that you should do if you did
Yeah.
conceive?
Well, interestingly enough, I feel the lack of research, like I almost wish I'd gone to see someone who was also a fertility specialist because the person I went to see was just an endo specialist. So she didn't really have any advice. She was like, oh, okay, well, you don't need to go on any medication. You can just go and try then. I was like, okay. I was kind of like really in the dark. And I didn't even know about fertility specialists at this point. I had very tunnel vision. This is what I want, this is where I'm going. And I didn't look outside the box too much at that point. I was just researching. And I feel like for me, as soon as I get told that I have something, I'm like, perfect, there's a reason. And I almost feel like a sense of happiness because I'm like, great, this is the reason why it's not happening. I can now focus solely on fixing this. But it's my fix in the past has always been, what medication can I take? This, that, and the other. But I fell into a really dark place after that. I felt quite, I don't know, negative, sad, and my GP put me on antidepressants. And I feel like that made me worse. And I remember thinking I was better. So I decided to come off them when that's like the worst thing that you can do, to come off them. And it just drove me deeper into a hole. I isolated myself from everyone, my friends, my family. And my sole purpose was just, I need to get pregnant, need to get pregnant. And then it became regimented. And me and my husband even resented the idea of, like, you know, you're living in 2-week cycles. And it was just absolutely exhausting. Now I look back, the amount of tests that there was like faint lines on, that I was just like, oh, it's just an indent line, this, that. I reckon I probably had a chemical pregnancy every single cycle, but I just didn't understand. And so much money spent on pregnancy tests during that year. So I think this was 2022 at this point. One thing about my infertility journey is it's made me connect with a lot of people who also were going through something. And I ended up connecting with a friend who I did like boot camp with years and years ago. We reconnected, and she said she worked at the hospital near me and she knew a lot of the fertility specialists. And she's like, have you ever considered going to the fertility clinic? And I was like, I didn't even think I needed that, but maybe I do. So I remember booking in, and they got me to do a pelvic scan. And she basically was like, all your endo's grown back. I was like, are you actually joking? So in less than a year, it had all come back. And I was like, great. So I remember they put me on suppression, so something called Cineral. So I don't know if you know what that is. It's based, have you heard of Zoladex?
I have, but did you want to
Yeah.
just explain what it
Yeah.
is? Yeah.
So Cineral and Zoladex are like suppression medication that can basically stop your ovaries and put them to sleep and stop your estrogen production, because estrogen feeds endometriosis. So if we can stop the food, hopefully we can stop the growth, essentially. And I was really worried to take both of these, and I've taken both of them. I started with Cineral because I was really scared of Zoladex because of the way she'd spoken about it, what I'd seen online. And I felt incredible. I was like, oh my God, if this is what menopause is like, I'm absolutely in for a great time. I was like, I didn't realize how much my endo was kind of impacting my life until I slowed my estrogen down. I just felt so much more alive. But I remember I was on that for 6 months. And then I did my first round of IVF because she wanted me to lose a bit of weight because I'd gained a lot of weight in this time from being on the antidepressants. And so I'd lost a bit of weight, I'd been on the suppression, and I did my first round of IVF. And I'd say it went pretty well. I remember I got 10 eggs, 5 fertilized. I did a fresh transfer at 3 days, and then I had 3 in the freezer. So again, I scare myself by what I see online, and sometimes people don't end up with any eggs. Some people end up with 30, and I'm like, oh my God. So I was like, you know what? I'm grateful to have 1, if I'm honest. So that fresh transfer took, and I remember my numbers were all doubling as they were meant to. And on my birthday in April, it's always an April season, I swear, for me with pregnancy. But I remember on my birthday, we went away. We went to stay at like a little staycation place. And then I started having bleeding. And I was like, okay, I'm really worried because I was on Clexane. So I was like, I'm on blood thinners. So maybe that's it. They were like, stop the Clexane. But anyway, we ended up having to leave because my mind, I was like, I'm just so stressed about everything. I remember researching online, trying to find some miracle story on the internet somewhere. But I remember it was all going okay, but my progesterone, I was spending like $100 every 5 days on progesterone to try and keep my levels at bay to help stop bleeding. But then everything seemed to be going okay. And then at 10 and a half weeks, like I'd had on and off bleeding, but at 10 and a half weeks, I passed like a really big clot randomly, and I'd stopped bleeding for a while. But then I passed this clot, and I was like, oh God, texted my obstetrician. He got me straight in. He's like, the heartbeat slowed a bit, come back in a few days. And at this point, we'd also started looking to buy a new house because we were like, oh, let's upsize. We're in a good place right now. It's a good time in the market. We'll sell our place, buy a new house. We found the house we're in now, and we went and looked at it on the Sunday after that scan, put in our offer, we got it, and then 4 days later, went and got another scan, and they were like, I'm really sorry, there's no heartbeat. And you're like, okay. And I remember it was the same woman who told me about my first one, who told me about this one as well. And I remember being so horrible to her. I was like, I know, you told me the last time, because she was trying to explain what a missed miscarriage was. And I was like, look at my history. But it's not her fault. You kind of get stuck in this like just really resentful mindset. So I remember I had to have a D&C for that. And then I decided had a few months off, a few months recovery, because then we had to sell our house. I remember my work just being crazy. So I didn't really have time to grieve properly. I was always someone who just kept throwing myself into something else, something new, just to try and bury it, really. But what I didn't realize is burying it was making it worse. And at this point, I'd also tried to reconnect with my friends who I'd pushed away. Even though they kept trying to be part of my life, I didn't hold space for them and what they were also going through because I was so consumed in my own life. So I was really trying to make an effort for them. And I remember I did a transfer, my first frozen embryo transfer, just before one of my best friend's weddings. And it took, and I was really excited and they were excited. And I remember I'd had a small bleed again and I was like, oh, fuck, okay. I went home. The nurses were like, look, you can either do a blood test now or wait till Monday. I was like, I'll wait till Monday. I'll wait for the weekend. I remember I went and got the blood test Monday. And then I forgot I had a hair appointment that afternoon. So had all the foils in my hair. And it was 4 o'clock. And I was like, they must have forgotten to call me. Surely everything's okay. Surely if something was bad, I would have been the first on their list to call. No, wrong. They called me at 4:30, full head of bleach. And they were like, I'm really sorry, that bleed you had, unfortunately, you have lost the pregnancy. And I was like, okay. So I've got to again, like bury, keep it all in. And then, yeah, I remember from there, I think it was a week later, I had my best friend's wedding and I fully broke down. And I'm so embarrassed, but I think it was like a real glass shatter moment, if that makes sense. Like, because I wasn't in her bridal party, and rightfully so, because I hadn't been a very good friend for the past few years. And I'd missed all these milestones that all my friends had gone through. And that for me was like, okay, something needs to shift now because I'm letting infertility be my entire life and I'm over it, like truly over it. I remember going back to like where we were staying. I remember texting my like psychiatrist clinic because he had diagnosed me with ADHD earlier in the year, but he was like, come back to me when you've had your baby. Very positive mindset. It was great. He's like, we won't medicate you until then. And I was like, I need to be medicated right now because I'm not coping. So yeah, I got on the medication and that shifted so much for me. Like I was finally able to understand like how I felt and why I was behaving the way I was behaving. And it helped me stop hyperfixating on things as well and needing an answer for everything. Because that's one thing with IVF and infertility is like we always want an answer on why this is happening. And it's just sometimes you're just not going to get an answer and you need to be okay with it. And that's really hard to kind of come to terms with. And for some people, we feel like it's easier to know what every single medication does and what this, and it's too clinical. And we're not made to have to know all that stuff. Yes, I think we need to know what we're putting in our body, but we don't need to know. I think sometimes information is a curse. And when we know too much, it's, I don't know, I feel like we can just stress ourselves out so much. And that's what I was doing. Like, I was talking to my mum yesterday. She's like, you are such a researcher. I don't doubt that you wouldn't have researched every single thing you need to. I was like, I am. I research things to the point just because if I love something, I will research it to death. Like, I'm obsessed with crystals. I research them because I want to know what they all do. Like, I love it. It gives me dopamine. So for me, then being medicated, I was like, okay, great. I was starting to like heal myself, and I was putting myself into like hobbies and things like that to kind of help navigate being on a break, because my fertility specialist put me on a forced break. She was like, no more. You need to be okay up here before you're going to be okay to move forward. And she also put me on Zoladex for 6 months, because you have to go on, well, my clinic always put me on for a minimum of 6 months.
How far in you at this point?
So this was the end of 2023.
3 years nearly?
3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had a 6 month break, and in that time, I did things that kind of like healed my soul a bit. I just did fun things. I think went to the Eras tour in Sydney with my friends and my husband, and me and my husband went to Bali. I think that was the year. So this is 2024 now, beginning, and it's the year I turned 30 as well. So I decided 30 is going to be my years. It's going to be when things change. And I kind of put that as my mindset. Like, I was no longer letting infertility rule my life. I was going to do things that brought me joy. Went and got like tattoos, and I was like, yeah, I'm just doing fun things now. And then I remember I'd had all this break. I'd put a lot of time into my body and healing. And then I did a frozen embryo transfer, and it just completely failed. This was in June 2024 or July. And I was like, what do you mean? I've been on this break. I'm all healed. I'm all better. What do you mean? And so at this point, I had one embryo left, and I'd seen my specialist, and she basically said, you need to have another endometriosis surgery, like a laparoscopy, but there's a real risk because you could end up with a colostomy bag. And in my head, I was like, whoa, that's like really intense. And I was like, do I want to give so much of myself to have a baby that I end up losing some of myself as well? Like, is that pushing it too far? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, what was the explanation for that? Is it just because where they had to remove the endo from?
Yeah, because
Wow.
it was kind of close to my bowel, and they didn't fully know. And she said you'd have to see this specialist and have an MRI, and they'd have to plan for it, and you wouldn't be able to do it until do another cycle to the end of or to the beginning of 2025. And I was like, oh my God, there's just so many delays. I was like, I was just fucking over it. I feel like I'm just being pushed out all the time. So then I decided to go, and then this is when my life turned a bit woo-woo. So I decided to pay for a fertility cleanse, psychic fertility cleanse, because I'd seen it all over social media, and I was like, you know what? If I don't do it, then I'm always going to forever be thinking about it. So I paid the money for that, and literally that weekend, I found my first deck of oracle cards, and I pulled out like my entire life. I was like, oh, okay, wow, there's like magic in this. All right. And then I remember finding a new clinic that I'd never heard of. And it was like a bulk bill clinic, or so I thought, bulk bill clinic. And they were able to see me in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, well, clearly this cleanse did something, because it's like opened up a pathway for me. I went and saw this doctor, and they found all of these things, and they were like, yep, you need to have surgery. And I wouldn't work, like, there's no risk for a colostomy bag or like that. And he kind of gave me a lot more confidence. And I was like, okay, great. So I went in for this surgery, but because I was worried, I think I'd put worry into him. He's like, I could have got it, but then I was worried because you said you were worried. And I was like, well, to be honest, I'm glad you didn't touch it then, because I want someone who's confident removing it. And then the thing is, I kept telling myself I felt ready and felt good, but my mindset's very strong. I tell myself I'm okay, and I'm probably not. So 2 weeks after my surgery, I said, okay, I'm ready to move into my IVF cycle. So they put me on a longer cycle. So I did 2 weeks of injections, and then I moved into the round of IVF. I got 11 eggs, and I think 8 had been fertilized. And so by day 5, only 1 had made it though. And I was like, that's a huge drop. And I was like, what the hell? So that was like really heavy, but I did the transfer for that one. And then that one took. So I was like, okay, great. And then I remember I went to get my blood test and she was like, your levels are really low. I was like, great. And then I'd had bleeding again. And they were like, we just are really worried about ectopic. And I'm like, you know what? Now you said that, that's what it's going to be, isn't it? I just like something in me was like, what, you've said that now, and that's what's going to happen. My nan had just passed away. I remember praying to her. I was like, please, 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 like just help this happen. Like I can't keep doing this. And I remember going to get my bloods and they were all doubling as they were meant to, but they just didn't sound convinced on the phone. And I was like, okay. So I remember I went in for a scan I remember I'd taken the day off work to hang out with my friends because we're massive Taylor Swift fans, but we wanted to watch the last Eras tour together. And, it's very healing. It was really healing for like our friendship, but also like our inner child stuff. So I remember I had a scan first thing in the morning and we went in and the lady was like, oh, the sonographer's just running late. Okay, all good. And then she said, I'm so sorry, the sonographer's dad's just had a fall. She can't make it in, so we're going to have to rebook you. I was like, things are just lining up to not be great. And I remember I could find somewhere else to get a scan that day at 11 or 4. Something in me was like, just pick 4 because once you go there, you're not going to be able to leave type thing. And I wanted to still have that day with the girls because I think ultimately I needed it. Because again, my life has just been consumed by infertility and IVF and loss. And I'm like, nah, I'm making a decision to delay this. I'm not in pain. It's nothing wrong. So at 4 o'clock, I went to this scan. She didn't even show me the screen. She was like, we know you obviously have done a transfer. We know you're pregnant because you got your bloods, but there's no pregnancy in there. But she said, your right tube is not looking good. And I was like, okay. Me and my husband are just so used to hearing bad news at this point. We're like, okay, we just, whatever. She's like, so you need to go straight to the emergency room. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, I'm not in pain. And at this point, I didn't really understand what an ectopic pregnancy was. I just went home instead to pack a bag. I was like, I'm in no rush. We got to the hospital and there's a massive queue because the hospital near me is like the 3rd busiest in Australia for the ED. There's something in me. I was like, I can't skip ahead of people who look way worse than me, even though this is life-threatening. And they say, you need to skip the queue. And I remember sitting down, I was talking to the lady when it was finally my turn. I said, I'm having an ectopic pregnancy. And she rolled her eyes and she was like, and what makes you think that? I was like, well, the fact I've done IVF and I've just come from the scan place and they've told me that my right tube is not looking great. And she was like, oh, she put me straight on a wheelchair, took me straight through. I had 10 people around me and they were like taking bloods, putting the cannula in, I think it's called, talking to me about private health. And I just remember this was my grounding thing. I was like, yep, I'm private health and you make sure you take me back there. Like take me back to my private room. And I remember someone saying to me, oh, you'll probably get a choice of surgery or medication. I said, I'm not taking medication again, obviously, because I'm traumatized from the previous one, even though it's different medication. But again, I didn't know that at the time. I was like tunnel vision. And then I remember the girl coming up to me and she's like, so we have to remove your right tube because the pregnancy looks like it's in there. And I was like, I don't know what I thought an ectopic surgery would be, but I didn't think it would be my right tube being removed. I was like, oh, I thought you could just get the pregnancy out of the tube. I just didn't know. So I had like a 30-second breakdown. I didn't allow myself too long. So I was like, I'm surrounded by a lot of people here. And then I remember looking out of the like curtains and I saw like on this nurse's station 1111. And then I just instantly calmed down. And it's because that's been like you can't really see. It's been a really grounding number for me. I've got it tattooed there. You probably can't see it, but I've seen it throughout my entire journey. And every time I've seen it, I've been like thinking of something and I feel like it's always just been a really grounding thing for me. I just felt instantly calm. Like, this is part, you need to do this, go through this right now, and you're going to be okay. It's shit, but you're going to be okay. And that's just kind of gave me the strength, to be honest. And I think it was about 7:30 p.m. They were literally waiting until it was safe because I'd eaten earlier that day. They wheeled me through. I remember the guy wheeling me through was like, "Oh, what, you must be a really big deal because they're not doing surgery tonight." I was like, "Yeah, very big deal." I remember the guy, the surgeon I had, and he looked terrified. He looked really worried wheeling me in there. And I'm quite perky. I'm like, it's all good. Just make sure you take me back to private. They told my husband it would be about 45 minutes surgery. So I remember being put under, and then I remember waking up and it was close to 11 p.m. So it'd been about 3.5, 4 hours. And I was like, has anyone called my husband to tell him I'm okay? And they're like, no, not yet. I was like, I sent him home to look after the dogs because we didn't want to leave them alone. And he's probably sitting at home thinking I've died. None of you have called him. Like, what do you mean? And then I remember I got back to my room and I called him and I was like, has anyone called you? He's like, no. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, well, I'm okay, obviously. But I remember waking up and it was a really tough recovery. I had drains, I had so many stitches, wounds, whatever. And I remember the next morning, the surgeon came in, and again, he looked terrified. I was like, oh my God, have you had to remove my uterus? Like, the way he looked at me, he goes, we removed your right tube, but there was no pregnancy in there. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, we couldn't find it. It had left your tube, and we were trying to look throughout your body for it. And we think we found it in your abdomen. But because of all your endometriosis, so again, my endometriosis has grown back in 3 months, less than. It was made it really, really hard to find. So we think that we found it.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the only way they could confirm is because the bloods saw that the HCG had gone down. But that could have literally been the fact I felt none of that pain, none of that movement happening, and like that, because it basically the pregnancy had ruptured as well in my abdomen and I didn't feel any of that. And that to me is quite terrifying because I don't know what's going on in my body, even though I can really intuitively tune in. I'm like, that's really scary to me. But that was a really pivotal point as well in my journey because I was like, this is killing me. Like, going through this is like really traumatizing. And after this, I decided to go and see another doctor who was a little bit alternative, and because I wanted to try a treatment that he had. I can't dive too much into it because I ended up reporting this doctor. So I'm not allowed to lean in too much because otherwise they might be able to identify him. When I went there, I had to sign a massive consent form. And this was only a month post my surgery, but he was the only one in Perth who provided this style of treatment. And I was like, well, I'm desperate. I need to try anything. I still had not quite given up or, on my search, and had to sign this massive consent form. And my husband had to be there as well, which I found really strange. I get, but I'm like, this isn't an IVF clinic. This is just like a different type of doctor. I went in and he did like an examination, but he shut the curtain on my husband, which I found really weird. I was like, I don't mind him being here. The rooms were kind of gross, not very clinical in my mind. And then he proceeded to like come to my boob area. He's like, you need to lift up your bra. I need to, and then proceeded to squeeze my nipples.
Oh my God. I'm sorry you went through that. I have no words.
No, neither.
No words.
And,
Oh my God.
I don't know what he was doing it for. And I kind of went into shock. Later, I found out it's checking for secretion, which is checking a hormone. But when I ended up talking to another doctor, he's like, there's blood tests that we can do for that. So that's not okay. And when he was using the speculum as well, he was hurting me because, again, I was a month post surgery. And I said, oh, that hurts. And for anyone listening, when you say that, doctors, it's ongoing consent. They are meant to continuously ask you if you're okay. It's not a one and done. And if anyone continues after that, even though you said you're hurting, that's not okay.
100%.
So anyway, after that, I remember feeling really icky. I remember crying in the car because I was like, I don't know what's just happened, but I don't feel right. And yeah, that doctor then later, that the week after, called me to tell me that, because he'd done a swab, he's like, oh, you've got chlamydia. And I was like, what? And he's like, oh no, I mean candida, like thrush. I'm like, imagine you didn't just correct yourself. That could have been horrific for my marriage, because then, like, who knows what would have happened. But I remember this was just before another transfer that I had. And I remember this is a really low point, because I remember thinking not about the chlamydia. I was like, oh my God, am I going to be able to do another transfer?
Yeah. That's where your mind goes with like fertility though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the end, I found out that doctor had been charging my husband's Medicare and my Medicare without my knowledge, and for things that are not related to, like, I remember I called the admin to book an appointment and they charged my husband's Medicare. And I was like, you're not meant to charge for speaking with the admin. That's not right. I know. So cooked. So in the end, and this is like me, I'm very much like a no, I'm not standing for that. Women are being taken advantage of, and that's not okay. I don't care if you're the only one who offers a certain treatment. Women don't deserve to go through that just for this treatment. It just didn't sit right with me. So I ended up putting in a complaint to APRA, and they took it seriously. And that doctor, he didn't renew his license essentially, because he had to change ways that he, I don't know, acted. Again, the whole consent, like code of conduct, like thing. And the Medicare is a whole nother thing. I don't know. When you put complaint into Medicare, they just don't get back to you. So I'm like, who knows? But this is a very big sign, is to understand, anyone listening, you need to understand your Medicare, understand what you're being charged, make sure that doctors are not taking advantage of you, because they will. And I just think it's so important, and especially so many people fall for the low cost clinics when actually they can end up costing more as well, because you can't get Medicare rebates from them because they're bulk billing. But that's a whole nother can of worms. After that, I had one more transfer, and I did that transfer. It was my last 2 remaining embryos, because from my second round, one made it to day 6 in the end. So I transferred that one, and then my last one from the other clinic. So double embryo transfer. I was like, yep, this is all aligning as it's meant to. And it just didn't take at all. And I was like, oh, okay, I've got nothing left. Like, I was just like, there's nothing left now. And I remember going to my specialist and I said, I'm not doing anything else until, like, something's clearly wrong and I want to find out what's wrong. And I feel the problem at the moment in the infertility and IVF space is doctors are so willing to just throw you in without finding a root cause. And it really pisses me off, if I'm honest. And it's like, over the past year, I've really learned that IVF is a business. Yes, so many people need it, absolutely, but IVF needs to be done in conjunction with other care, essentially, like potentially a naturopath, whatever. I ended up going to see a naturopath, and she was like, she did all of this testing on me. I found out I had a microbiome issue in my vagina, uterus area, cervix, and literally it just took me going on like the flora tablets to fix up. And then I also found out I had insulin resistance, and insulin resistance has major inflammatory issues for your uterus. And there's major research about the impact of transfers and IVF success or pregnancy success with insulin. And I'm like, why is none of this looked into in IVF? I'm like spending thousands and thousands of dollars. And that's one test, that's free blood test. I spent a lot of last year really leaning into like my health. I moved back to my old clinic because I just found that they private just put a lot more personalized care in. And then they performed my surgery. They did a lot of prep work. They made me do an MRI. I went and got a colonoscopy because it was close to my bowel. So I had the bowel surgeon on site, on call if they needed. I had 2 of the best surgeons from the clinic doing my surgery. I was in a much better headspace. I'd worked on my insulin resistance. My specialist recommended I go on Manjaro for a few months because that also helps with your insulin. So I did that and I was feeling really good, and I felt really good moving into that surgery. And the surgery went really well, and he got like pretty much, if not all of it. And so then I was on Zoladex at the time as well. And then I moved into my third round of IVF, which they changed up the protocol a bit, and I got 15 eggs this time. And I think 11 or 9 fertilized. And I did a double embryo transfer, fresh transfer. Unfortunately, it didn't take. But then I ended up with 5 in the freezer. So that's like my best result yet from actually just like taking the time to focus on my body a little bit more, like the root cause almost. But I also lent heavily into like my energy healing and all that sort of stuff, like Reiki. I did shamanic healing. I did like just so many different crazy things, but all of them kind of like took a block, I reckon, that was stuck in me because I really do believe that endometriosis and all of this infertility and IVF, it creates such a negative, almost like smoke in our body. And we can almost like not even realize that it's doing it. And I think people forget like you're allowed to be happy in the wait. Like you don't have to be sad, even though a sad thing is happening to you. For me, like last year was really about taking back my narrative and my story. And I really put boundaries in place. I was like, don't treat me differently because I'm going through this anymore, because you're giving me permission to feel sad about it. And I don't want to feel sad about it anymore. I just want to be a normal person now. It's been 6 years, 5 years of me being treated like a sad story, and I'm over it. There's so much more to me. And I keep saying, I was like, this is merely just like the thriller chapter of my very big story. I don't want to let it define me or consume me anymore. So that's been, I suppose, took me a while to get there, but I suppose why I'm a little bit different online. I got so consumed with being sad because I feel like that's the narrative we tell ourselves we have to be. But I'm like, I'm actually not sad. And I want to show people that you don't have to be sad during the wait and you can do things that bring you joy. And because now I connect with like spirit babies, and when I do readings, like I get messages through from babies, and basically the message is like, they don't want you just sitting there waiting for them. They want you to live your life and have fun. Like they know you want them, and basically they're going to guide you where you need to go, but you don't need to force anything, like, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It does. It sounds like at the moment you are in quite a good headspace considering everything that you've been through. Is that where you're at the moment? Do you still have those 5 embryos in the freezer?
Yeah, I still have them in the freezer, and I'm waiting to see my specialist because I was just very confident. I didn't book another appointment, but I'm seeing him next week to decide kind of next steps. And I'm not really sure what my next steps are, to be honest. I'm not really trying to overthink it. I kind of really want to be guided by him, because it's like I get really torn because I'm like, do I need to be researching, you know, what to do next? But then I don't want to fall down the trap of just constantly trying to find a problem with me. It could have just simply been that maybe a fresh transfer was not ideal for that moment. Maybe it just needed to be a fresh frozen one because my OHSS was kind of at risk because I'd gotten so many eggs, but I felt really good. So I think there's so many things that you're just never going to find an answer to. So I'm like, do I just follow the breadcrumbs, follow my intuition? Yeah, I don't know.
This conversation is going to be so insightful and helpful for anybody who is navigating a similar path or might even just be starting out their fertility journey, especially the piece around self-advocation and just, knowing what's right for you, I guess. But just to finish our conversation off, I just wondered if you had any advice for anyone who might be in the trenches right now. I mean, you've already given so much amazing advice. And then also, I guess, what you could do to support someone if they did want to come to you and have a reading, or just, what you can provide for them as well.
Yeah, so I would say my biggest advice is don't fall for the sad stories online becoming your story. Don't believe that just because you're going through this, it's a bad thing. I often say, if not this, then something better. Like, I often think of every amazing thing that has come into my life since having a loss. And yes, as much as I would love to have a baby, like, I'm able to kind of look the glass half full and look at the amazing things that I would have never had if I'd ended up having my baby the first time. I might not have got my second dog. I might not have ended up finding our dream home where we would love to raise our kids. Like there's so many upsides, even though you feels really shit right now. And if anyone did want any guidance, I post a lot on my page to hopefully help shift your mindset and help you see that it doesn't have to be sad. But I also, especially on my Instagram, I have the link there because I can't get it in my TikTok yet. But I have a link to my website where I offer like mini, middle, and like large readings where I can look a bit deeper. And for context, like some of the readings I've been able to pick up that maybe they need to do microbiome testing before they do a transfer. And she came back and said that her microbiome, she already had the testing coming, but it came back that she needed like antibiotics because there was an infection that she had. So yeah. And even if you just want just some comfort and guidance, like that's really what I'm here for, what I love to give. And I also have a little like community, which is like a $11 a month or something, but I do like collective guidance in there, and we just have like a don't let you spiral in there. So if you want kind of like to ask me questions, or there's other girls in there, we all kind of support each other in a really healthy, safe way. I find it quite helpful because, you know, people are scared to post on Facebook or TikTok. They don't want anyone knowing who they are. So it's like anonymous, but you're supported in there. And like Reddit is just so toxic as well. And I'm like, I just wanted to make a safe space for women to be a little bit woo-woo, be a little bit delusional, have a spiral if you want, but I'm not letting it go further than that. I'm going to help kind of ground you. So yeah, that's me, I guess.
Incredible. You're doing some amazing work. So we'll link all of that in the show notes too on your website so people can get in touch with you if they want to join. And
Yeah. And I'll give you a discount code if you like, and then you can get that. I'll create one, and then if anyone wants a reading, they can use the discount.
That sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much for this conversation, Jess.
Thank
And
you.
good
Thank
luck
you for
with
having
everything
me.
in the future as well.
Thank you.
This has been The Space Between Two Lines. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and register on our website to share your story. The link is in the bio. Until next time.